Welcome back, and we're going to use this demo lesson to get some experience of working with EBS and instant store volumes. Now, before we get started, this series of demo videos will be split into two main components. The first component will be based around EBS and EBS snapshots, and all of this will come under the free tier. The second component will be based on instant store volumes and will be using larger instances which are not included within the free tier. So I'm going to make you aware of when we move on to a part which could incur some costs, and you can either do that within your own environment or watch me do it in the video. If you do decide to do it in your own environment, just be aware that there will be a 13 cents per hour cost for the second component of this demo series, and I'll make it very clear when we move into that component. The second component is entirely optional, but I just wanted to warn you of the potential cost in advance. Now, to get started with this demo, you're going to need to deploy some infrastructure. To do that, make sure that you're logged in to the general account, so the management account of the organization, and you've got the Northern Virginia region selected. Now, attached to this demo is a one-click deployment link to deploy the infrastructure. So go ahead and click on that link. That's going to open this quick create stack screen, and all you need to do is scroll down to the bottom, check this capabilities box and click on create stack. Now, you're going to need this to be in a create complete state before you continue with this demo. So go ahead and pause the video, wait for that stack to move into the create complete status, and then you can continue. Okay, now that's finished and the stack is in a create complete state, you're also going to be running some commands within EC2 instances as part of this demo. Also attached to this lesson is a lesson commands document which contains all of those commands, and you can use this to copy and paste, which will avoid errors. So go ahead and open that link in a separate browser window or separate browser tab. It should look something like this, and we're going to be using this throughout the lesson. Now, this CloudFormation template has created a number of resources, but the three that we're concerned about are the three EC2 instances. So instance 1, instance 2, and instance 3. So the next thing to do is to move across to the EC2 console. So click on the services drop-down, and then either locate EC2 under all services, find it in recently visited services, or you can use the search box at the top, type EC2, and then open that in a new tab. Now, the EC2 console is going through a number of changes, so don't be alarmed if it looks slightly different or if you see any banners welcoming you to this new version. Now, if you click on instances running, you'll see a list of the three instances that we're going to be using within this demo lesson. We have instance 1-AZA, we have instance 2-AZA, and then instance 1-AZB. So these are three instances, two of which are in availability zone A and one which is in availability zone B. Next, I want you to scroll down and locate volumes under Elastic Block Store and just click on volumes. And what you'll see is three EBS volumes, each of which is 8 GIB in size. So each of these volumes has a volume ID which is unique, and you'll note that each of the volumes is showing 100 IOPS. I talked earlier in the course about how GP2 volume types work, in that it provides 3 IOPS per GIB, but there is 100 IOP minimum. So because these volumes are 8 GIB in size, they all have 100 IOPS of performance. Now, these are all currently in use. You can see that in the state column, and that's because all of these volumes are in use as the boot volumes for those three EC2 instances. So on each of these volumes is the operating system running on those EC2 instances. Now, to give you some experience of working with EBS volumes, we're going to go ahead and create a volume. So click on the Create Volume button. The first thing you'll need to do when creating a volume is pick the type, and there are a number of different types available. We've got GP2 and GP3, which are the general purpose storage types. We're going to use GP2 for this demo lesson, which provides 3 IOPS per GIB of volume size. You could also select one of the provisioned IOPS volumes, so this is currently IO1 or IO2, and with both of these volume types, you're able to define IOPS separately from the size of the volume. So these are volume types that you can use for demanding storage scenarios where you need high-end performance, or when you need especially high performance for smaller volume sizes. Now, IO1 was the first type of provisioned IOPS SSD introduced by AWS, and more recently they've introduced IO2 and enhanced it, which provides even higher levels of performance. In addition to that, we do have the non-SSD volume types, so SC1, which is cold HDD, ST1, which is throughput optimized HDD, and then of course the original magnetic type, which is now legacy, and AWS don't recommend this for any production usage. For this demo lesson, we're going to go ahead and select GP2, so select that. Next, you're able to pick a size in GIB for the volume. Now, the minimum and maximum will depend on the type of volume that you select, and for GP2, it has a minimum of 1 GIB and a maximum of 16384 GIB. Once you've selected the volume size, you'll see that you're provided with an indication of how much performance this volume can provide. This is based with GP2 on the size of the volume. So in this case, it's 3 IOPS per GIB, and so we have a total of 300 IOPS of performance. Remember, there is a 100 IOPS minimum, and with volumes below a certain size, you have a burst value. So this is the performance that this volume can burst up to. If we allocate more space to this volume, say for example 10,000 GIB, then we no longer have the concept of a burst, and this achieves the maximum level of performance of this volume type, which is 16,000 IOPS. Now we're going to select a volume size of 10 GIB, and notice how even though we only have 3 IOPS per GIB, there is this 100 IOPS minimum. So no matter how small you create a GP2 volume, you're always going to have this 100 IOPS minimum. Now, EBS volumes are created within a specific availability zone, so you have to select the availability zone when you're creating the volume. At this point, I want you to go ahead and select US-East-1A. When creating volume, you're also able to specify a snapshot as the basis for that volume. So if you want to restore a snapshot into this volume, you can select that here. At this stage in the demo, we're going to be creating a blank EBS volume, so we're not going to select anything in this box. We're going to be talking about encryption later in this section of the course. You are able to specify encryption settings for the volume when you create it, but at this point, we're not going to encrypt this volume. We do want to add a tag so that we can easily identify the volume from all of the others, so click on Add Tag. For the key, we're going to use name. For the value, we're going to put EBS test volume. So once you've entered both of those, go ahead and click on Create Volume, and that will begin the process of creating the volume. Just close down any dialogues, and then just pay attention to the different states that this volume goes through. It begins in a creating state. This is where the storage is being provisioned and then made available by the EBS product. If we click on refresh, you'll see that it changes from creating to available. And once it's in an available state, this means that we can attach it to EC2 instances. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to right click and select Attach Volume. Now you're able to attach this volume to EC2 instances, but crucially only those in the same availability zone. EBS is an availability zone scoped service, and so you can only attach EBS volumes to EC2 instances within that same availability zone. So if we select the instance box, you'll only see instances in that same availability zone. Now at this point, go ahead and select instance 1 in availability zone A. Once you've selected it, you'll see that the device field is populated, and this is the device ID that the instance will see for this volume. So this is how the volume is going to be exposed to the EC2 instance. So if we want to interact with this instance inside the operating system, this is the device that we'll use. Now, different operating systems might see this in slightly different ways. So as this warning suggests, certain Linux kernels kernels might rename SDF to XVDF. So we've got to be aware that when you do attach a volume to an EC2 instance, you need to get used to how that's seen inside the operating system, how we can identify it and how we can configure it within the operating system for use. And I'm going to demonstrate that in the next part of this demo lesson. So at this point, just go ahead and click on attach, and this will attach this volume to the EC2 instance. Once that's attached to the instance and you see the state change to in use, then just scroll up on the left hand side and select instances. We're going to go ahead and connect to instance 1 in availability zone A. This is the instance that we just attached that EBS volume to, so we want to interact with this instance and see how we can see the EBS volume. So right click on this instance and select connect, and then you could either connect with an SSH client or use Instance Connect. And to keep things simple, we're going to connect from our browser. So select the EC2 Instance Connect option, make sure the username is set to EC2-user, and then click on Connect. So now we're connected to this EC2 instance, and it's at this point that we'll start needing the commands that are listed inside the lesson commands document. And again, this is attached to this lesson. So first, we need to list all of the block devices which are connected to this instance. And we're going to use the ls_blk command. Now, if you're not comfortable with Linux, don't worry, just take this nice and slowly and understand at a high level all of the commands that we're going to run. So the first one is ls_blk, and this is list block devices. So if we run this, we'll be able to see a list of all of the block devices connected to this EC2 instance. You'll see the root device. This is the device that's used to boot the instance. It contains the instance operating system. You'll see that it's 8 gig in size. And then this is the EBS volume that we just attached to this instance. You'll see that device ID, so XVDF, and you'll see that it's 10 gig in size. Now what we need to do next is check whether there is a file system on this block device. So this block device, we've created it with EBS and then we've attached it to this instance. Now we know that it's blank, but it's always safe to check if there's any file system on a block device. So to do that, we run this command. So we're going to check, are there any file systems on this block device? So press enter, and if you see just data, that indicates that there isn't any file system on this device, and so we need to create one. You can only mount file systems under Linux, and so we need to create a file system on this raw block device, this EBS volume. So to do that, we run this command. So sudo again is just giving us admin permissions on this instance. mkfs is going to make a file system. We specify the file system type with -t and then xfs, which is a type of file system, and then we're telling it to create this file system on this raw block device, which is the EBS volume that we just attached. So press enter, and that will create the file system on this EBS volume. We can confirm that by rerunning this previous command, and this time, instead of data, it will tell us that there is now an XFS file system on this block device. So now we can see the difference. Initially, it just told us that there was data, so raw data on this volume, and now it's indicating that there is a file system, the file system that we just created. Now, the way that Linux works is we mount a file system to a mount point, which is a directory. So we're going to create a directory using this command. mkdir makes a directory, and we're going to call the directory /EBS test. So this creates it at the top level of the file system. This signifies root, which is the top level of the file system tree, and we're going to make a folder inside here called EBS test. So go ahead and enter that command and press enter, and that creates that folder. And then what we can do is to mount the file system that we just created on this EBS volume into that folder. And to do that, we use this command, mount. So mount takes a device ID, so /dev/xvdf. So this is the raw block device containing the file system we just created, and it's going to mount it into this folder. So type that command and press enter, and now we have our EBS volume with our file system mounted into this folder. And we can verify that by running a df space -k. And this will show us all of the file systems on this instance, and the bottom line here is the one that we've just created and mounted. At this point, I'm just going to clear the screen to make it easier to see, and what we're going to do is to move into this folder. So cd, which is change directory, space /EBS test. And then press enter, and that will move you into that folder. Once we're in that folder, we're going to create a test file. So we're going to use this command, so sudo nano, which is a text editor, and we're going to call the file amazingtestfile.txt. So type that command in and press enter, and then go ahead and type a message. It can be anything, you just need to recognize it as your own message. So I'm going to use cats are amazing, and then some exclamation marks, and then I'm going to press Ctrl O to save that file, and then Ctrl X to exit. Again, clear the screen to make it easier to see. And then I'm going to do an ls space -la and press enter just to list the contents of this folder. So as you can see, we've now got this amazing testfile.txt. And if we cat the contents of this, so cat amazingtestfile.txt, you'll see the unique message that you just typed in. So at this point, we've created this file within the folder, and remember the folder is now the mount point for the file system that we created on this EBS volume. So the next step that I want you to do is to reboot this EC2 instance. To do that, type sudo space and then reboot and press enter. Now this will disconnect you from this session, so you can go ahead and close down this tab and go back to the EC2 console. Just go ahead and click on instances. Okay, so this is the end of part 1 of this lesson. It was getting a little bit on the long side, and so I wanted to add a break. It's an opportunity just to take a rest or grab a coffee. Part 2 will be continuing immediately from the end of part 1. So go ahead, complete the video, and when you're ready, join me in part 2.